Hi, everybody. Welcome back to the Outmarket.pro podcast here on YouTube. Glad to have Bob Tiell back with me. He's a career strategist headquartered in Louisville, Kentucky. And this is his second time on the podcast, and we're going to talk about this current situation, climate with employment, where we're continuing to see some stresses and changes post-COVID that seem to continue. And then also we're adding a new layer of layoffs across the country here. This is early February 2023 that we're recording this. So Bob, welcome back.
Thank you, Mark. I appreciate the opportunity to join you again.
So let's just jump right in. It seems like we continue to have a hangover from the pandemic. A lot of those attitudes and feelings about work that people had in the pandemic or immediately following the pandemic seem to still be with us. And then add on some layoffs nationally. We seem to have new national company layoffs every day, significant numbers of them. So we're hemorrhaging jobs on the one hand. The employment numbers, this is, so again, first part of February, employment numbers still seem strong though, although it looks like mostly hospitality and I believe it was medical with this latest increase. But sort of lay out what you see happening nationally and locally for you, if there are any differences in what's going on with employment.
Okay, I would start off, Mark, by cutting to the chase a little bit. And I would say that we continue to deal with a fair amount of turbulence, from my view, in the labor market and in the workforce. The latest jobs report, for example, indicated that more than 500,000 new jobs were added into the picture. So just a little over 500,000 new jobs, and that's always a good sign. But by the same token, as you were suggesting, we're also seeing some fairly substantial layoffs. Now, those layoffs seem to be occurring primarily thus far in the tech sector. So, Microsoft, Amazon, the big tech boys, they have laid off here in the last 2, 3, 4 months, literally thousands of people. And whenever we see those figures, that's pretty sobering. But then you can kind of look at it in a reverse way. Again, as you were suggesting, the unemployment rate remains very low. The jobs report indicated in that same report that the unemployment rate is 3.4, which interestingly enough is the lowest that it's been in 50 years. We're getting whipsawed a little bit depending upon the numbers that we look at. But once again, as you stated just a few minutes ago, we are beginning to see those tech sector layoffs. We're beginning to see them seep into other sectors. And I saw a report recently where the toy manufacturer Hasbro laid off a large volume of employees, and the giant logistics company FedEx, they also announced some fairly substantial layoffs. So it is beginning to seep into other sectors, and I think we're going to see that steadily increase. It's one of those situations where we all have to hold on tight and be prepared to see what comes next. But we're getting kind of mixed signals, at least as I view it at this point.
I I watch a new podcast, new to me, called the All In Podcast. And it's a bunch of Silicon Valley venture capitalists um, and several from the so-called PayPal mafia that have gone on to venture work. And their read on these layoffs are that these companies, a lot of these tech companies, grew their employment numbers rapidly last year, 2021, coming out of the recession. There was a rush for talent. They were falling all over each other to hire talent. Interest rates were almost zero. So the cost of that borrowing that they did to increase the hiring was low, whereas now interest rates have doubled. So the cost of money has increased significantly. And they're calling this, I think Elon Musk really started this with the Twitter layoffs, where he hacked over 50% of the employment. And these guys are saying this is just a return to sanity, a return to more normal times, and that we shouldn't look at these as tragedies. I mean, they certainly are for the individuals that are involved, but not as tragedies in a broad sense, because these people were brought on, mostly were brought on recently. And he's saying that this is just a return, or they're saying a return to sanity, and cutting some of the fat out of it. Twitter is, I'm going to stop here in a second, but Twitter, although I'm not on it, all reports I get are that it's operating just like it used to, with fewer than half the number of employees. So I don't know. What are your thoughts about all that?
Yeah, I'm glad you brought that point up, Mark, and I would agree with you. Based on my experience and what I read and hear, I think the tech sector largely, I'm sure there were some exceptions, there always are, but I think they largely overreached, overhired, and a lot of that was due to the factors that you've just outlined. We were going through an unprecedented period because of the pandemic. So they were, I think, really beefing up beyond a level that was probably needed. And in some respects, I think they did that out of a sense that they might be ultimately down the line dealing with some challenges, either as it related to workforce or just things in general, business in general, and I think they're now largely pulling back in a way that does approximate more where things were at before the pandemic hit, so I think we'll continue to see that. A colleague of mine and myself, we authored and edited a book about a year ago, which talked about the return to a new normal. And, we meant that facetiously. We never thought we would get back to a kind of status exactly like we had before the pandemic hit. It would be somewhat of a return. And I think we're seeing that with the tech sector, although it's likely to be a bit different. The other thing I'll quickly throw in, Mark, and it ties into our local labor market here in Louisville, Kentucky. I have seen 2 or 3 people, clients recently, who have recently been downsized by Humana, which is one of our larger corporations here in town. And they're tied into the healthcare sector and the insurance sector. And so they're beginning to likewise reduce their numbers. The folks that I've seen are part of a larger volume of people that reportedly have been let go.
Another factor that we should plug in here is that most analysts financial analysts anticipate further recession here during the first part, if not the entire 2023. So I think these companies are sort of trying to get out ahead of that and anticipating lower sales numbers. So another thing that we saw during the pandemic was this great resignation, where people were resigning, especially moms that for whom childcare fell disproportionately, as it usually does, on them. What do you see? I never could figure out how some people made it, that were previously dependent on a regular paycheck and joined the gig economy, Uber, delivery services. Are some of those folks going back, and do you think it's reflected in the gains that we saw, the extra strong gains of that 500,000, which was mostly hospitality and medical? What do you see about people's willingness to go back to the workplace?
It's an interesting question, and I think an important question. And once again, my short answer is I think we're seeing mixed developments. I see plenty of indications that some folks indeed have managed to make it through the pandemic and are now have already or are now ready to return to the workforce. And I see others that in many ways, I believe, are still very much hurting. It still represents what I have tended to characterize as turbulent times. And a lot of this is simply due to the fact that there's a paradigm that in many ways I think has emerged by virtue of the pandemic. And it's a paradigm that, because the pandemic generated various stressors, mental health challenges, and in more severe ways, at least for some folks, it emerged in terms of something that I would tend to characterize more as outright trauma. People that experience so many different stressors, not just for themselves, but maybe for loved ones, their partners, their family members, likewise, and so much pressure, so much stress that it did convert ultimately into more of a trauma-like experience. And as that pattern began to emerge, it began to tie into a lot of employee disengagement. If they were working, they weren't putting out the effort that they had been accustomed to. They were holding back. They were not getting back into the workforce. We saw a reduced labor market participation rates from both men and women. And those labor market participation rates continue to remain lower for females than they had been before the pandemic. So all of that in turn converted into workforce shortages. And we're still seeing those workforce shortages. Now, employers have had to try to respond to that in any one of a number of ways. But going back to the point that I led with here, in my response to your last question is mental health challenges, trauma, the great resignation began to kick in, quiet quitting. A lot of folks were simply, they decided that they were reevaluating their very relationship to work. They weren't quite sure how they wanted to manage work as they moved forward, because of how they had been impacted by the pandemic. So just a lot of reassessments, reevaluations, inner turmoil that prompted a lot of people to leave the workforce, remain out of the workforce, and I think we still see the residue and the remnants of a lot of that dynamic.
Have we seen any statistical calculations on productivity lately? I have not seen anything, and it seemed to me pre-pandemic that we were constantly seeing increases in productivity due to technology, mostly technology, but I haven't seen any recent studies, at least on a national level. I'd be curious to see if you've seen any of those, because based on this, what did you call it? I forget the term. Slow working. What is it?
Term did I use? Disengaged, quiet quitting.
Quiet quitting. That's it.
Okay.
Where they're not quitting. They're still showing up. They're doing what they have to do, but they're not putting in extra effort. But I can't imagine that there aren't significant productivity losses during this period. Whereas pre-pandemic, I think the productivity was on a steady incline. Have you seen any studies on that?
I have not seen. I poked around to see if I could find studies that really do address that particular productivity kind of question. I haven't found anything that looked solid to me, so I haven't been pleased with what I've seen thus far. But I will say this: that the Gallup Corporation, which has tried to look at productivity. It does try to look at productivity, but it tries to do that through what I'm going to describe as a mediating variable. It tries to address that through the idea of employee engagement. And what their research shows, as they focus more on employee engagement, is that it has in fact decreased through the pandemic period, particularly when you compare it to the engagement rates in the decade prior to the pandemic. It's gone down by, depending upon the particular figures that you look at, anywhere from 7 to about 10% reduction in engagement. And Gallup tries to then look at that reduced engagement factor in terms of how it's in turn impacting on productivity. The challenge has been that I've not seen anything that's come from them recently that has attempted to do that last stage conversion, which would enlighten us a bit more about productivity rates. I think we'll begin to see some of that material. I just don't see it yet.
Yeah, some of it's probably hard to measure.
It is.
It was probably the hottest topic during the pandemic and immediate post-pandemic time. And that was get your ass in the office versus work at home. The Wall Street firms were some of the first banks. I think Chase was one of the early ones to say, okay, guys, it's time to get back in the office and get back to normal. I think those edicts were followed by upticks in new cases. So whenever they would get tough, there'd be a new outbreak, especially in New York, and people would be sent home again. Purportedly, we were moving towards some compromise called hybrid. What do you see nationally and locally on where we are with that right now?
Mark, I think this is still very much in process. All the what I would characterize as more in-depth, serious kind of studies and surveys that have tried to look at this issue, particularly in terms of trying to make projections for the future. The general conclusion that seems to emerge is that we are not going back to where we were pre-pandemically. A lot of firms are going to have to address what it means to have reduced physical bodies in their downtown offices, for example. And there are plenty of examples of companies that are reviewing what all of this means in terms of their physical structures, their physical offices. The general conclusion that seems to have been drawn thus far is that we will be looking at a hybrid workforce, and it's again, I think a little too early to know exactly how it's going to parcel out. But I've come to the conclusion in my own mind that across the country, a good number, the majority of companies are going to ultimately have to face up to a hybrid kind of work situation, unless, there are always caveats, unless the nature of their company, the nature of their industry, if you're talking an automotive manufacturer, they've got to have people there in production on the line, making sure that the product gets generated. So there are exceptions, but I do believe for a majority of the companies around the country, if we had a crystal ball and could look at it 5-10 years down the road, I think we're going to be dealing with a hybrid workplace in many cases.
Downtowns, especially San Francisco, Silicon Valley area, New York, Lower Manhattan, they're just hollowed out, and businesses that depended on downtown workers, are continuing to suffer and lose out. So it's definitely changed downtowns,
Oh, yeah.
especially the tech companies.
Yes.
There's been some discussion around, do we have hybrid Tuesday and Thursday, Monday, Wednesday, Friday, in the office and home the other times? Do we check to see when a physical meeting makes sense, and do physical meetings when they make sense and virtual meetings when they don't? There seems to be a lot of struggle continuing over that and how to structure it. You've talked a little bit about it, but any other thoughts on how it's going to shake out?
I think, once again, we're touching on a really important factor, workplace factor, a work redesign kind of factor. I came across a survey here just within the last week or so that basically seemed to opine that for those work organizations that were embracing a hybrid work model, that they have decided that it's going to cluster pretty much around Tuesday, Wednesday, Thursdays, midweek, and they will try to urge their workforces to be physically available Fridays and Mondays. So that's the way it seems to be breaking out. But back to your point, there has not been, I'm sure it is going on, I just have not seen results from any study that's attempting to drill down and looking at questions like, well, under what conditions, with what kind of industries, on what kind of days might it make most sense for a person to be physically present at work, and what days might that not be so necessary. I think we're going to have, some of the management people in the business world, the people in my industry, the behavioral sciences. I think there will be some studies emerging that attempts to pin down some of this more effectively, so that it can guide work organizations and how they need to try to design their workplace moving forward.
I don't talk much about it on the podcast, but I have an international workforce with my company. I have a digital marketing company, as you know, Bob. And we were virtual pre-pandemic. We've never had offices, physical offices, people working from all over the world. And, I think so much of this has to do with the attitudes that people have about virtual work. And also I see some division between introverts and extroverts. The extroverts that were doing a lot of physical networking, small business people, they were really ready to get back to networking, pressing the flesh, literally. But my group is so efficient, and they stay energized. I could not have a more productive workforce than I do. So as an introvert, I love Zoom, and I'm happy I get all of my social needs, networking needs done here. And maybe it's a lack of need for touch or being in the same room. I do a little bit of that, but there were some people during the pandemic that were suffering more than others with isolation. And I know I have a couple of therapist friends that have gone back almost exclusively to physical meetings with their clients, a few holdouts doing it virtually, but they had some horror stories about it. So anyway, I think a lot of it has to do with just a predisposition of certain people and how they view Zoom, as to where they come out on it. I don't know. I'm meandering a little bit.
Again, I think you're making some really important points, Mark, and my hat is off to you, because I have come to view you as that kind of person who is that kind of professional who was very much out in front of the curve, even before the pandemic hit, with regard to embracing technology and having the capacity to work remotely and be very engaged in a digital kind of way. Before the pandemic hit, I did not know that many people other than you. I'm hard put to identify even one or two other people that were kind of out in front in the way that you were. So, you did a terrific job, and I think you had I have to suspect and believe that you had a whole lot stronger comfort level as we went through the pandemic period. And you're also absolutely right that personality plays a big, big role here. I'm going to use myself as example just briefly. My lengthy professional career has certainly been pretty much 100% live involvement with people, either individually or in group workshops, things of that sort. And any business development that I was doing, it was live, it was face to face, etc. So it was a bit more of an adjustment for me when the pandemic hit, and shifting to Zoom and doing, at least for a fairly lengthy period of time, doing, for all practical purposes, my work remotely. And that felt pretty awkward and strange initially. But I gradually got adjusted to it, and I think reached a point where I was much better equipped to embrace it. But then I've asked myself once again here more recently, I've stopped to reevaluate, and I've said, okay, Tiell, where do you stand now in terms of your business activity? How much of it is remote? How much of it is going back to maybe the things you used to do? And I would say I know it's not quite 50-50. It's probably 60-65% or so live, face-to-face. And the balance continues to be remote kind of work. So I take that, and personal experience, I take that to mean that I'm going to be embracing probably a hybrid approach pretty much from this point on. The other thing I'll just quickly cite is my daughter-in-law. She also operates in the behavioral sciences, not in this market, but in the Baltimore market. And she, before the pandemic hit, all of her work was, live, face-to-face. And then she quickly shifted, and there was a lengthy period of time where it was all pretty much remote. And now that things have settled down, and she's actually moved out of her prior practice and is opening up, along with a colleague, a new, different private practice. We talked a bit about, what do you expect to do in terms of live meetings versus remote? And she at least says at this point that it's going to be a balance, maybe not 50-50, but something of that sort. So it's a small sample size, me and her. When I think about other colleagues that I know in my field, I see them holding on to a hybrid kind of an approach. And I think the nature of the work we do allows for that.
Let's dig into that just a little more. How comfortable are you, with the mix of physical versus hybrid? And then how comfortable are you in the online virtual like this? Is it almost second nature to you?
No, I'm not gonna go so far as to characterize it as second nature. I would view myself historically as more of an introvert than an extrovert. The extroverted side of my makeup, I have historically characterized as a forced extrovert. I've learned how to behave as needed in an extroverted fashion. But once again, if I had to lay this out in a proportional kind of way, I would say I'm deep down, I'm probably 60, maybe even 70% introvert, and the balance extrovert. But knowing how to put on that extroverted face when it's necessary.
I'm doing a little bit of physical networking. For example, yesterday, I did go to 2 physical networking meetings, and I left very early. I did have one virtual meeting on the site of the physical meeting before that started. And then I had 2 in-person meetings, and I probably left the house. I had an hour's drive each way, left the house around 8, got back around 1, because 1 was a lunch meeting, maybe 2, more like 2. And then I got to my computer, and by the end of the day, I felt like my productivity was just almost zero. You know,
Yeah.
I am so aware now of how much time it takes and how much less productive I am, because you're going to stop and pick up the dry cleaning or something, you know. So it always, even a 1 hour coffee meeting with somebody ends up being a half a day out of the office. Then you've got to catch up with email. And so I've noticed how much more productive I am. Now, on the other side of that, my Zoom meetings, um, quite often I'll have to start my next one with a bathroom break, or maybe I need to start scheduling 50-minute hours like therapists do, just to be able to take a few notes and go to the restroom. But another thing that I've noticed is, or thought about, is all of those things that happen in the workplace, the physical workplace, water cooler talk, stopping by your neighbor's uh, nook and chit-chatting, a lot of the conflict that comes about, music too loud, or that probably doesn't happen that much anymore, but there is so much distraction in the physical workplace, and you've got more problems with supervisors, interpersonal conflicts, people rubbing each other the wrong way. And, you know, in my workplace, none of that goes on. I mean, we are all working. I also don't pay people by they're paid by the hour, but they're paid to work. So when they're not working, they're all contractors. So when they're not working, for the most part, I don't think they're claiming time to be paid.
Yeah.
But I
Yeah.
think about so many of those distractions, and I haven't worked very long in a physical workplace. For the most part, I've been, you know, on my own, but there's got to be productivity gains there from those wasted times that don't happen. Although I guess you could argue the flip side, that some of that rubbing elbows and being close to people leads to more communication and more productive communication. Do you have
Yeah.
any thoughts around that?
Yeah. It's a couple of things that hit me as you were describing some of what you've been dealing with. I'm a solopreneur. So I haven't had as many people have required. I haven't needed to test the waters with regard to interfacing with another significant employer, contract worker, somebody else that the relationship with another person is just a really key factor. I suspect if that were a part of the picture for me, that it would present another layer of challenges. If I had had to go through in the pandemic period, dealing with a staff of a dozen to 15 different people, as I had to do in my prior role, it probably would have played out very, very differently and would have presented a whole new set of challenges. I'm not sure just how well I might have managed it. The other thing, Mark, that's going through my mind in light of what you shared is thinking back on the book that I believe it was Tom Peters and Robert Waterman wrote several years ago called In Search of Excellence. And it was Tom Peters that coined the term management by walking around.
Mm-hmm.
He was a strong proponent of the idea, sort of embedded in the traditional workplace, that the best managers were those that certainly weren't sitting in their office, but they were out there communicating with their team, the other members of their team. They were working it by engaging ongoing conversation, communication, checking in regularly with the other members of their team. And he was a strong advocate of that kind of an approach. And so if there's a lot of merit in that idea, then it really does beg the question for those folks that are trying to manage effectively in a purely remote environment, that's going to be a different animal. It's going to create different kind of requirements. And some people certainly are going to be able to manage it, I suspect, quite well, but others probably not. And I think you're one of the fortunate ones, Mark. Thus far, you're demonstrating that you've been able to deal with that more largely 90-95% remote world pretty doggone effectively. And I can appreciate what you just shared, your experience in getting out there and doing a lot of live meetings here recently. You found ultimately at the end of the day that your productivity was not what it customarily is up to.
So let's talk about the elephant in the room. You may not have thought about it before, but we are on the cusp of a new technological era with artificial intelligence. Chat GPT is the rage right now. It just came out, I think, the first part of December last year. And at least my YouTube channel has blown up with it. And it brings up this question. So let's just assume most people are familiar with it. Maybe we'll give a little bit of a summary here. Chat GPT is an artificial tool that has absorbed much of the internet prior to mid-2021, and it allows you to write content, research content, and it writes it out in longhand through the program. Let's see, it was, I'm trying to remember the name of the company, something AI.
OpenAI?
What?
OpenAI?
OpenAI, thank you. Came out with it. Microsoft initially funded about 2 to 3 billion of it and have committed 10 billion more. So the question comes up, Bob, every time there's new technology, starting at the Industrial Revolution, it was claimed to be a jobs killer. And there weren't going to be enough jobs for people to go around. So what are your thoughts with this new technology? Is it going to add capabilities and people will just get retrained? What's your crystal ball say about AI?
Well, I think what you were suggesting just now is true. Whenever we have new technology emerging on the scene, it can raise, a lot of different kind of feelings, some positive, some maybe more fearful, anxiety provoking. We're going to see, I think, our fair share of Luddites, people that are going to fight any new development. I'm always curious to see what does emerge and what the potential of something new and different technologically, and how ultimately I personally might be able to benefit. So when I was first introduced to this here just recently, Couple of thoughts that ran through my mind was, well, how might this help me in terms of my own research and writing? I, along with a business colleague, were working on another book, and we're pretty much finished with the manuscript. And I'm wondering if I had discovered this a little earlier on and been able to make use of it, might it have saved a whole lot of time on my end, as well as for my colleague. That was one thought I had, but right there along with it was another thought. Is this going to make the challenges for people operating in higher ed, the professors, instructors, et cetera, in that environment, are they going to find themselves just that much more suspicious and needing to take a look at any work product, any paper that's been generated by any student, having to determine ultimately, well, how much of this was generated by the technology versus how much it was an outgrowth of that particular student. So I'm sort of wondering if there won't be some of those complications that emerge with this technology. What might it mean for journalists? People that basically are in the writing game and do that all the time, 100% of the time, over several years. What's going through their mind as they think about the implications that this technology might have for their particular field? It raises a lot of questions, no easy answers, but I'm enough of an optimist that I've got to believe that in some way, shape, or form, I'm going to find a way to benefit from this without incurring any problems along with it.
That same group, the All In podcast that I referred to earlier, they predicted that one of the hottest new job positions, was going to be the AI chat GPT questioner, the person who knows how to ask the right questions to get to the answers that they're looking for.
Right.
And I've already, in my experimentation with it, have found that the way you ask the question definitely affects your answer.
Oh, yeah, absolutely. Absolutely. It not only affects the answer, but it affects, very importantly, the quality of the answer. So there's a direct relationship between the quality of the question posed and the likely quality response that one would hope to get.
There are all sorts of problems that I see. For example, it will give misinformation with credibility and certainty. I asked for a list of periodicals for a reference on a particular topic, including links, and it gave article titles, book titles, Amazon resources, all with links that were dead links. Nothing, not a one. They were all fictitious.
Oh, that's interesting. As you were describing that, I thought to myself, boy, whenever I'm doing a paper, if I could quickly generate a list of references that were solid, I'd be in like Flint. But it doesn't sound like that's going to work so well.
Yeah. So you've got to really check it anyway. There are lots of resources, and there are already ways to get around some of the penalties. Google, although they're developing their own AI tools, they are penalizing websites, articles, blogs that are written with AI. There are diagnostic tools to show what percentage of an article shows up as AI and as opposed to individually or new content. I forget what their term is.
Well, university professors will love that feature.
So you can run it through this tool. It will tell you what percentage is what. And then there is a tool, and I'll go ahead and plug it. It's called jasper.com. And it is an AI tool, but primarily it will rewrite copy. And I saw a demonstration from 94% AI diagnosed copy, and it was turned into 94% original work with jasper.com. Anyway,
Jasper.com.
we won't dig more into that, but I think there are a lot of changes. And my view is that this is the most significant technological change and new era since the internet, the PC, maybe the iPhone, that we're in for some significant new developments and changes with this, because this is the first one that's really caught on and caught the attention of the masses. So,
well, Mark, I think you were the first person that introduced me to all of this a few weeks back, and so I have benefited from that introduction, and have tried to educate myself a bit more in terms of what is going on with all of that. So I thank you for that, and I would agree it's going to be really important and interesting to follow to see how all this develops.
maybe I'll point out that other tool that we talked about in our earlier meeting, character.ai.
Yeah.
And that one I'm not sure is going to be that much of a threat in the workforce, but it sure was fun. Character AI will allow you to bring up semi-famous to famous people, living and dead, and you can ask questions, and the character, and it looks like it's it's sort of moderated by a human. I don't know for sure, but it will answer your question as if they are that person, living or dead. And I've tested it out on a lot of different people, asked questions of lots of people in the tool, and it's very interesting. And they take a lot of the content that exists from that person and rewrite it to answer the question. And I haven't seen any that didn't seem realistic.
Yeah.
That seem really off base. So I mentioned that to the audience just as a tidbit to test it out. Character.ai.
Yeah, thanks for bringing that back up. And having played with it a little bit, but wanting to do more, I'm really curious in terms of experimenting with that as it applies to some of the giants within my field, B.F. Skinner, Freud, the list goes on and on.
Yep. Well, Bob, if someone wants to contact you, and talk a minute about what you do professionally, we really haven't covered that. You cite your experience, but talk about what you do professionally and how people could reach you.
Yeah, basically, I'm a career strategist and vocational expert. I've got a wealth of experience. I've worked for more than 40 years helping individuals, helping work organizations, helping attorneys, helping higher ed, a variety of folks and organizations with a wide variety of career management, employment, and workforce development kind of services. It includes helping people figure out what career paths are the most suitable, most optimal for them. It includes helping people who have, for whatever reasons, lost their job, get reemployed as quickly as possible. It involves business startups and or business expansion. It's helping organizations with things like team building, outplacement, personnel screening and selection, family business consulting. I've helped along with team members that I've had over the years. I've created a lot of innovative, first of a kind, one of a kind projects and initiatives. One here in recent years was geared to the long-term unemployed population, which garnered me and my team a national award. So it's assisting on just a huge variety of different subjects and matters. The work that I do for attorneys, that's an important piece of it as well. And not all attorneys, but I'm referring particularly to personal injury attorneys, workers' comp attorneys, divorce settlement attorneys, medical malpractice attorneys. These are all attorneys representing clients where some injury or other unforeseen adverse life event has really significantly impacted, and it's raising all kinds of questions in terms of how that might affect a person's earning power and their employability moving forward. So that's just kind of a brief overview. I teach in higher ed from time to time, a lot of other roles that I play. I can be reached at the Psychology Resource Group here in Louisville. And that work number is area code 502-394-9990. My cell is area code 502-445-5183. And my email address is B as in boy, H as in Harry, T as in Thomas, IELL@gmail.com.
Great. Well, as before, this has been a rich experience. I really appreciate you coming on and talking about employment issues. I don't think we're going to find a stable point anytime soon. It doesn't feel like it. Feels like we're still in flux.
I agree.
So let's plan to get back together in a couple of months and see what new issues arise or have arisen during that
Super.
period.
Would love to do that. Thank you so much again for today's opportunity, Mark.